There's so much to deconstruct in Mormonism. There's so much history to learn because you're only taught a very specific narrative. So once you start reading, holy Moses, you are down the rabbit hole. Every time I read it was something else. I was like, wait a minute, am I just stupid? Like, nobody taught me this growing up. That was not taught to me.
Between belief and unbelief, faith and doubt, certainty and uncertainty, there is space. Each of us is thrown into this place to love, to ache, to rage, to heal, and to experience the wonder and the mystery of being. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to The Wonder and the Mystery of Being. This is episode 18, and it's called Mormon Deconstruction. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see that this is looking a little like Casual Friday for me. It's getting quite hot here in San Diego, and I'm in this 1969 Airstream trailer, and it does have AC, but it's not that great. And when I'm recording anything or doing a Zoom call, I have to turn it off because it's like super loud. So I am in pretty stripped down attire today. If you're listening on the podcast, you can just imagine I am in a cut-off tank top from my Encinitas turkey trot from a couple years ago when we used to actually be able to do marathons. And, well, I'm wearing shorts, but you can't see that even on YouTube. So you can, from the waist down, use your imagination. Maybe I should have left that one alone. Anyway, I'm really excited about today's conversation. And I'm a little anxious about it too, because this is the first time I've sort of engaged with anyone on a topic where I really feel like I don't have a right to have a lot of opinions. My guests today are Kyle and Neesha Brost, and they run a TikTok account called challenge.faith, and they have been coming out of the Mormon Church, also known as the Church of Latter-day Saints, or Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It's a lot of words. Commonly known as Mormons. And Mormonism it's one of those faith traditions that has always been sort of in my periphery. Like, as a Christian, I was always sort of aware of Mormons. I knew that they were considered Christians more or less, but, didn't always know if I considered them like quote unquote real Christians. So this is definitely a faith tradition that I personally am not anxious to criticize because I just don't know enough about it personally to do so. But there are enough similarities between Kyle and Neesha's story and so many people that I know, including myself and my partner Jess, who their story is so similar to so many of these other stories I've heard of people that have taken another look at their Christian faith in general. Maybe, from my situation, it's from a charismatic evangelical background, but lots of people who come out of Reformed or, other mainline denominations or Catholic. A lot of people that go through sort of a process of deconstruction or sort of another look, a deeper look at what they believe. They share a lot of similarities with Kyle and Neesha's story. So Kyle and Neesha are really the first couple I've interviewed. And as much as it was meaningful to learn more about the Mormon tradition and their sort of journey out of it, it was also really meaningful to hear their experience as a couple. So I think even if, if you're intrigued by the Mormon angle, there's lots for you to digest in this episode. If you're intrigued by the angle of them being a couple, there's a ton to learn in that regard as well. I want to make it super clear that my goal in this conversation is to learn and to hear from Kyle and Neesha, hear their perspective, hear their experience. And my goal here is not to lob criticism at a faith tradition that I'm just not connected to. I've somewhat made it sort of a personal policy to not publicly criticize faith traditions that I'm not connected to. So I don't talk much about Islam on this channel. I don't talk much about the Hindu faith. If I'm ever talking about other religions, it's typically from the perspective of like, what can I actually learn from them in maybe a positive way? And that's something I'd like to do more often. But this is this weird sort of gray area where the Mormon faith is similar enough to Christianity, and indeed, part of the Christian faith, depending on who you ask, enough so that I felt like it was worth having this conversation. So if you're out there and you're listening to this and you're Mormon, I'm not coming after you here. I am here as a student. I'm here to learn. And I wanted to hear Kyle and Neesha's perspective and share it with you all. So I thought that was worth saying right out of the gate. As always, if you're watching on YouTube, if you could subscribe and hit that thumbs up button, that would be really helpful. It makes a really big difference in the algorithm, and also kind of makes me feel good whenever I get new subscribers. Also on the podcast, same thing. If you could hit that subscribe button wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever, that way you'll be updated automatically every time there's a new episode. That would mean the world to me. Also, on the podcast side, if you could go and rate the podcast in your podcast app and maybe leave a little comment, that would be really helpful too. This podcast and YouTube show is growing, and I'm loving tackling more episodes every week. And I have a ton of amazing interviews that I'm conducting over the next couple of weeks that I'll share with you over the coming months. I'm so stoked. There are some people that I'm going to get to interview that I have no right getting to speak to. Some very, very, very smart people. So I'm thrilled for what's coming down the line, and I would love it if you would join me and subscribe. So with all that out of the way, please enjoy my conversation with Kyle and Neesha Brost. Kyle and Neesha, thank you guys so much for joining me for this conversation. I have a vague idea of what I want to talk about with you guys, but I have a feeling this conversation is going to sort of take on a life of its own. So we can just let it go where it goes. But, we'll start with, I have a background in sort of talking to people about this process that we sometimes call deconstruction. It's, coming from a Christian perspective myself, like an evangelical sort of Christian perspective. One group of people that I haven't really talked very much to in this process is people that have come out of the Church of Latter-day Saints, like yourselves. And so I'm stoked to have this conversation and see where maybe we've experienced some similar things, maybe we've experienced some different things. But I thought it might be productive to start with a couple of just like really basic questions about LDS stuff for people that are less familiar with the sort of faith tradition. I thought, and we don't have to hang out here long, but I figured it would be a good place to start just to get us, get everybody up to speed.
And there are obviously some nuances and differences between mainstream Christianity and the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints or Mormons. And so, I think that sounds great.
Yeah, first, so that was actually going to be my first question, is that I've heard the term LDS or the term Mormons or Mormonism. Is the term Mormon sort of out of vogue within the faith tradition? It seems kind of like it is. And
it is. So they came out.
Is that the case?
A couple of years. I think it's been about 2 years ago. The current prophet or current leader of the Mormon Church, the Latter-day Saint Church, came out about 2 years ago and said that the term Mormon shouldn't be used anymore for them, and that it was something they took as offensive. And so it definitely is out of vogue. They're actually revamping all of their websites and all of their promotional materials to try to get rid of any hint of that word. It's difficult, though, because most people in society are a little more familiar with that term. And so even when we're trying to be respectful of the religion, sometimes we need to use that word just to help people know.
Right. And and LDS is a little clunkier than Mormon too.
Yeah.
So it's, so within the faith tradition, because I have to be honest and say that in the background that I have of evangelical Christianity, I always sort of considered Mormons not Christian, or quote unquote like not real Christian. I mean, within the faith tradition, do most members of LDS churches or the faith consider themselves Christian?
Yeah,
very much so.
I would,
Yes, as
Okay, so that's what I thought.
as Mormons, you believe in the Bible and the Book of Mormon, so you do develop
Right.
a faith in Jesus Christ as your Savior, and that's similar to Christianity, mainstream Christianity. Is that right?
Yeah. Oh,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think
And
I think the big distinctions
was it sort of offensive or like upsetting to feel like you were sort of excluded in that way?
I think everybody interprets it differently. Neesha may have a different answer, and we'll answer back and forth throughout this. We're not always thinking on the same page, right, about all of this. So it was never really offensive to me because I was, and this probably is going to sound super arrogant, and quite frankly, it was. It was never concerning to me because I felt like what I had was the absolute truth. And so it didn't matter to me, like, whether you call me a Christian or not, if I've got the truth, it just doesn't matter what term you're using to call me or whether I'm a part of your group. So it was never offensive to me because I had that kind of really arrogant perspective on what I believed. But there are a lot of members who would certainly be offended by, being told that they weren't Christian in that kind of traditional sense.
Yeah.
Totally offended because I considered myself Christian. I had a testimony of Jesus and I loved him, and I felt excluded if someone was going to tell me I wasn't Christian when I felt like I was. So yeah, I would have been very offended.
And that makes complete sense to me. And I mean,
I think from a theological standpoint, and I apologize if I'm talking over you.
No, go for it.
From a theological standpoint, I think the big distinction and why a lot of kind of mainstream Christian sects don't view Mormonism as Christian comes from Mormonism's view on the Bible. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints doesn't view the Bible as inerrant. So it does believe that there are some flaws within the Bible. That's part of why they believe the Book of Mormon needed to come forth to kind of supplement and support the Bible. I think another one is the idea of Trinity versus Mormonism's view of a Godhead. So Mormons don't believe that God and Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit are one being. They literally believe they are three separate and distinct beings, which gets you into this interesting space of monotheism versus polytheism and some of those dynamics. And so I think it stems from kind of the view of the Bible, how the Book of Mormon fits in with that, and then the view of the Godhead or Trinity. And then the third one I would say is Mormons tend to be a faith plus works and often really emphasize the works dynamic. And so I think kind of a combination of all of those pieces are why a lot of mainstream Christians might say, well, you're not following the true Jesus, or you're not part of the rest of us because you have these different views on some things that are very core tenets to broader Christianity.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And that speaks to sort of some of my impressions of what I understood. I mean, it seems like a core difference is whether or not sort of revelation is closed, right? So it's like when we have the Christian canon, or like the Protestant and Catholic Bibles are not exactly the same as far as which books are in. So what we consider the canon is a little squishy, but most, I hesitate to even use the word traditional Christian here, but most non-LDS Christians would sort of view the canon as being closed a couple thousand years ago, where LDS individuals would, feel otherwise, obviously.
Right. Well, that's a big part of Mormonism is this continuing revelation. So it's not this idea of the Book of Mormon being an addition or supplement to the Bible. It's the idea that the church, the LDS church, is being led by a prophet, the same as Moses or Abraham or Peter. And so there's this idea that the church is continuing to be led by a prophet who speaks with and for Jesus Christ. And so that idea of whether revelation is closed or open is actually a really big factor in the LDS church or Mormon
Interesting.
church.
That's an interesting point, because I think most Christian circles I grew up in and have spent time in, even if people used the word prophet, they would use it cautiously, right? Because it would be like, it would never be this idea where you'd want to put a contemporary leader on the same footing as like a Jeremiah or as Isaiah or like Moses, or Aaron, and yeah, that sounds like that idea of having a present contemporary leader that you put on that same sort of tier or level. That would cause some interesting differences.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
I'm just going to hit a couple ones real quick, and we don't have to get stuck in the weeds, but these are just stereotypes. So like the connection with polygamy, and I from what I understand, the vast majority of LDS individuals are not polygamists, right? But there was a history there. Is that right?
There is, and you can obviously jump in anytime you want. Yeah. I don't want to be the only one talking. There is a lot of history. I think some of the confusion comes from, one, that the LDS Church, Latter-day Saint Church, did practice polygamy for a long time in its early years, and it was discontinued in the late 1800s. Some of the confusion today comes from that there are multiple sects of the kind of Mormon LDS Church. Yeah. So Joseph Smith was the founder, and when Joseph Smith died, there were several different factions that kind of formed and carried on. Some of those factions or sects continue to practice polygamy today, and because they have the same origin, they also utilize the Book of Mormon and some other canonized scripture. For somebody who's not deeply enmeshed in it, it can be difficult to tell, oh, this one's, from the fundamental LDS, or this one's from the reorganized, or this one's from the mainstream. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the largest by far, but that's certainly where a lot of that confusion comes from. The other piece is that while it is not practiced in Mormonism today, there are some odd theological, I shouldn't say odd, they're odd to me, theological dynamics where Mormonism does still believe in polygamy within heaven. So even though it's not practiced here on earth, a man can be married, or within the LDS Church it's called sealed. A man can be sealed to multiple women, and the teaching now is that when that man dies, he will have all of those women as wives. And so while it's not practiced today, it is still part of the theology, and it's part of canonized scripture for
That's
church
really
members.
interesting. When you say Canaanite scripture, are we talking about like the Ugaritic texts or stuff like that?
Sorry, canonized.
Oh, canonized. Okay, sorry. I've been studying pre-Hebrew Canaanite texts, so that's rattling around in my brain right now. So,
no, you're good.
Just and then like no alcohol, no caffeine. That's pretty typical, right?
Yep, that's called the Word of Wisdom, and that was a revelation given to Joseph Smith when he was organizing the church. And yep, you abstain from hot drinks, so coffee. In the old days, it also had hot chocolate and soup, but now with coffee and tea, and then no alcohol, no smoking, no drugs. And then there's a few in there in the Word of Wisdom when you actually read a couple things about when to eat meat and when to eat grain and how much to get. But nowadays, nobody actually listens to those parts.
Right.
It's just very strictly no coffee, tea, alcohol, or drug abuse.
Right. Yeah, that sounds familiar as well, because there's, in all the circles I came up in, it's like there's certain passages that you're like, oh yeah, we don't really talk about that one very much, or like we don't. Yeah.
Yep.
And then the other one is, and this one I actually didn't know anything about for a long time, is the undergarments. And I know you have we should actually say, I'll link this in the description below and the show notes, but you have a TikTok account where you explain a ton of this stuff. And I saw your explanation on the undergarments, but maybe you could just real briefly hit that here.
Yeah, so just to give it some context in terms of why it kind of matters. So it's a lot of these, like the word of wisdom and abstaining from coffee, tea, alcohol, tobacco, the undergarments. They're not just simple teachings that people are encouraged to abide by. These are things that you have to be living in order to enter an LDS or Mormon temple.
Oh.
Which, according to the Mormon view, is the most sacred and holy place. And so the reason that context matters is because there's not a lot of wiggle room in being able to live or not live these dynamics if you want to enter this most holy of places. And so...
Right, and just to cut in, you enter this temple so then you can receive exaltation. Without going to the temple, you do not get that.
Right. So there are ordinances that are performed in the temple like that Mormons consider to be equal to baptism. And so you are baptized outside of a temple, but in the temple you do additional ordinances which qualify you to enter the kind of highest levels of heaven, according to the theology. And so I just think it's important context to know that it's not like you can pick and choose whether you live these if you want to be worthy according to their standards.
It kind of comes as a package. Like, it's like, here's all the stuff that we do. Yeah.
Right. Well, and you're actually interviewed on whether or not you're doing these things. So if you want to go, you have to sit with an ecclesiastical leader and
Every
they will
2 years,
ask you, are you obeying the word of wisdom, meaning you're not drinking coffee, tea, alcohol, tobacco? Are you wearing the garments, which we're going to talk about, as prescribed? A bunch of other stuff too. Are you paying 10% tithing, and do you, submit your will to God's, and do you accept Jesus Christ?
Sustain the modern prophet.
Right. But so you're actually interviewed on whether you're doing these things in order to go
That's
to the temple.
fairly intense.
Back to the garments. It is a little intense, yeah. I mean, when you're in it, it seems normal because that's all you know. But
when you're in it, you only typically socialize with other Mormons, so it's a totally normal thing to be doing.
Right. So the garment, when you go to the temple as an adult, you do a ceremony or an ordinance that's called the endowment. Well, actually, sorry, it's called, the first one's called the initiatory. And in that ceremony, you are blessed with oil. You're washed. It's also called a washing and anointing. And you're washed with water symbolically, and then you're anointed with oil on different parts of your body. They've changed it over time, so now they just wash and anoint you symbolically on your head and the palms of your hand. When I went through, I actually had to wear an open robe, so it was a little poncho that was completely open on the sides. I was totally naked underneath. And then they actually touched different parts of my body. Nothing too crazy, but a little concerning, with water and oil. In order to do this, when you do that washing and anointing, you're given blessings, and then you're actually given the garment, which is a pair of boxer briefs and basically a T-shirt that have symbols on them, little sewn-in symbols that remind you of these promises, that your commitments that you're making to God.
And for the it goes down to your knee. They're like little biker shorts that go down to your knee, and then a cap sleeve shirt.
Right. I think you showed a photo of them in your TikTok, so I might try to do the same thing here.
Yes.
Yeah.
We did. Yeah, and those photos, just for the record, those photos are photos pulled straight from the LDS Church's website. So it's not like we went, digging for something that would be offensive to people. Those are straight.
Okay, I'm going to interject here real quick and just let you know that while I was editing this episode, I intended to find some images of the temple garments from the Church of Latter-day Saints website, and I didn't want to just pull images from anywhere else. I wanted to find approved images from the church because I wanted to be respectful. And I wasn't able to actually find any. Searching around on the church's website, it seems that in order to get to a page where you can actually view different undergarment options, you have to be a registered member of the church and get past a login, which I obviously don't have. So I wasn't able to display any images like I wanted to. But the whole experience did make me feel a little strange, like it's very secretive. So, I don't know. I just wanted to give you that information.
We also didn't do a fashion show, but if you're interested.
That's amazing. Well, yeah.
And then you're instructed to wear that garment both day and night. And so unless you're doing activities that would, pretty clearly not have you wearing underwear, then you would be wearing them.
It sounds like there's a little flexibility with what activities you're doing, maybe, or.
It totally depends on what you're doing, because I went through that. I exercise a lot, and before, when I first started exercising, right after I got my garments, I wore them underneath my exercise clothes. So I had exercise clothes that would cover, and you just sweat a ton. And then, like, as the years progressed, then I would just, like, wear the bottoms. Then I would wear, like, a tank top to work out in. And as the years progressed, I was like, I am so hot and so sweaty, and they're not, like, breathable. You change. So I was like, those have to go. I work out with a lot of other LDS women, and everyone does it differently. Some people wear them. Some people don't wear them at all. Some people just wear the top. Some people just wear the bottoms. Like, it's up to you when you work out. And when you're doing your interview to go into the temple, they do kind of say, wear them at your discretion when you're doing things like exercising. But if you're, like, gardening, you should probably wear them. You know?
That's the kind of counsel that you would receive.
That's so interesting. Right. Well, thank you for permitting that little, sort of overview. I'm sure those are the kinds of questions you get a lot. So you've probably asked them a lot, or been asked them a lot. But now to sort of like get to your individual stories, what has the process of? I mean, you guys have been sort of. It seems like rethinking and processing your faith and your beliefs the last little while. Overall, what has that looked like for you?
It's been a long process. So I think, you mentioned our TikTok, and people have watched our TikTok, and that makes the process seem pretty short. I mean, there's 60-second videos, and we have a bunch of them out there, and so it kind of makes this process seem like it's been a short process. But this probably started a good, like 3, 4, maybe even 5 years ago.
For Kyle.
For me, for me. And that's a big part of our story is we kind of came at this at 2 different time points, and we'll talk a lot about that. So it was probably, I don't know the exact timeline, because it's not like it's happening when it starts, right? You just think like, oh, I'm exploring my faith, I'm exploring theology, and so you don't know what's really happening when it starts. But I started to have some kind of primary theological questions about 4 years ago. And when I say that, some of your listeners may recognize from an earlier one the difference between a primary question versus a secondary question. And the secondary questions are the little ones, the things that nobody's really going to care how you perceive it. They may be like, yeah, that's kind of a weird thought, but nobody's going to be like, you should probably be careful there, whether, I don't know, Christ wore a white robe or cream robe or had short or long hair or whatever, But I started to have some kind of primary questions about 4 years ago, and they were questions around a lot about God, this idea of if there's one God and, this one God revealed himself to one people, why is he letting so many others just flounder if they have to go through this God in order to get this, ultimate reward? It just started to not add up. I just couldn't see this idea of like omniscience and omnipotence and all-knowing and all-loving lining up with how I saw the world operating and what I was seeing from the scriptures, especially the Old and New Testaments, of how God was operating the world. And then the big one for me came when I started to, so my background is in psychology. I have a degree in psychology, and I'm wrapping up a PhD in psychology.
Amazing.
Yeah. Well, I don't know.
No, that's awesome.
But I'm working. It started to hit me when I really started to understand the idea of belief. And I started to realize that no two people are even capable of believing the same thing. So in any religion, especially Christianity, you hear people, we hear it all the time, like, oh, I hope that you guys now believe in the real Jesus. And I always think that's only, no matter how hard you try, that's just your Jesus. Because it's impossible for us to conceptualize Jesus the same way. It's impossible for us to conceptualize God the same way, because it's this amalgamation of our whole lives that's creating how we conceptualize these things. And where it became problematic for me is the idea that belief would be a qualifier for something. If not all of us can even believe the same thing, then where do we start drawing lines between a belief that qualifies us for whatever it is? At that time it was salvation for me, and where belief doesn't qualify somebody. Where are those lines drawn?
That's a really good point, because I've experienced some of those same thoughts. Like, if you start to go like, well, do you choose to believe things, or do you find yourself persuaded by them? It's like, and I would say it's the second, because it's like, okay, if I invite you right now to choose to believe that the sky is pink. Like, you can't do it. So it's I've had that same thought. It's like, wait, so are people going to miss out on heaven and go to hell because they weren't persuaded? That was a problem for me too. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and there is this, in that whole idea of belief, there is this kind of deterministic element to it, where you have to ask that. Like, it's not as though to your point, it's not as though I could just say, oh, you know what, today I am like totally going to believe in whoever you tell me Jesus should be, or God, or like, I'm just going to, my whole heart and everything's going to really be in it because I just decide it to be. It just doesn't really work that way. And so that started several years ago, and that's where what it allowed me to do is just start to see more nuance in all of the theology. So it's not like that crumbled my faith or anything at that moment, but it just helped me to be a little bit more open, a little bit more empathetic, a little bit more nuanced in this idea of what's truth versus not truth. And so that kind of carried on for a few years. And then the big one for me, and Neesha will get into her story here pretty soon, the big one for me was really around the Black Lives Matter, George Floyd kind of time frame, because Mormonism has a very troubled history when it comes to treatment of people of color. So for a long time, people of color were not allowed to have the priesthood, which is like any sort of leadership position or responsibility within the LDS church. They also were not allowed to go to the temple, which in Mormonism, going to the temple is what gets you exaltation. Basically, they taught for over 100 years that people of color couldn't get to heaven because they couldn't go through the temple. And then the civil rights movement happens, and Mormonism doesn't adjust their teaching on people of color until 1978, which was just a few years before I was born. So it's long ago. And what's interesting, so Black Lives Matter starts to happen. George Floyd, obviously, it's getting a lot of traction, a lot of news. The Mormon Church comes out and does some stuff with the NAACP. And in one of their statements they released, they talked about how they totally disavow all of previous teachings about people of color. And there were some terrible teachings. This is probably going to be hurtful for some people to hear, but I think it's important for people to know how bad the teachings were. So some of the teachings within Mormonism, Mormons believe that there was a pre-life before Earth, where all of us existed just as spirits. And we come here to Earth in order for us to get bodies. So we have a spirit and a body. One of the teachings, one of the doctrines was that people of color in this pre-mortal life were fence sitters, meaning they didn't actually choose to follow God or Jesus. They just were kind of hanging out, not part of the war, not part of like fighting against Satan. They were just kind of fence sitters hanging out. That was literally the word that was used, was that they were fence sitters. And so there's a whole history of association with worthiness and skin color. The Book of Mormon itself teaches this, that the Native Americans, if they were righteous enough, would have their skin turned white.
Wow, I have never heard that.
So there's a lot of really problematic teachings when it comes to race, to skin color. And what Black Lives Matter did, so I'd already started to have some more nuanced openness. What Black Lives Matter did, and the church's association with the NAACP, is they all of a sudden said, well, we completely disavow all of these previous teachings. There's a couple of layers of problems to this as a believing member. So first off, go back to that idea of revelation, we're taught that the leaders are literally speaking for and behalf of God. So if they're now changing their teaching and doctrine that much, then it means God was racist.
You have to believe one of two things. You have to believe either God was apparently against people of color, or you have to believe that God was that the leaders at the time were not hearing from God properly. And that leads to the further question, how do I know that the leaders are hearing from God properly now? Right.
Yes, exactly. So that's exactly what happened, is you just start to see that. The other thing that was problematic for me is even when they came out and they said we disavow all of these previous teachings, they never actually issued an apology. And they can't, because if they issue an apology, they're admitting that their prophet was wrong.
Oh.
And that is such a core part of their tenets, this idea of that the prophet is speaking to God, that they could never admit that their prophet wasn't actually speaking to God, so they couldn't apologize for a prophet who was speaking to God. So it did that. It opened up this dilemma where it was like, okay, I can't believe that God is racist. I can't believe that God has something against people of a different skin color, because it just doesn't match up with my experience in the world. So there must be something else going, right? These people must not be speaking to God. And then you just start to look at the pattern within the LDS church of they are making these changes in terms of how they look at people of different skin colors, how they look at women, how they look at the LGBTQ community. They're making these changes, but these changes are always 10 to 15 years behind society's advocates. So who's the prophet? The advocates who are out there doing the work to change public opinion and impression so that the church can do it easily, or this person who's supposed to be speaking to God boldly? And so that's really when the gates opened up. And then what that does is within the Church of Jesus Christ Latter-day Saints, you're always taught to not read outside sources or critical sources of the church. You're taught to only read sources from the church that encourage and support faith in the church. But having this nuance, seeing these contradictions, gave me space and room to start reading stuff from outside of church-approved sources. And then all of the pieces come apart, right? You start to see, holy cow, this entire narrative that I was taught about the organization and the functioning of this church is all problematic. It's all there's complexity and messiness and problems and terrible behavior. You just start to everything starts to
one
fall
of the
apart.
things I've noticed is that there are certain beliefs that the LDS church holds that when I looked at them initially, I was like, well, that sounds weird, like really weird, right? But then I would just step back and look at the beliefs that I held growing up, and if they were normal because I was raised in them, and if I step back and I'm like, wait, like the body and the blood, we do like crackers and Welch's grape juice to signify the body and the blood of Jesus, and then we eat it. And Catholics actually believe that physically becomes the actual body and the blood of Jesus, like transubstantiation. So it's like, I mean, I'm not Catholic, but all of us are believing all these things. And when you step back from all of them, you're like, whoa, if I wasn't raised with that would sound really, really weird.
Right. I always thought it was a little, as a believing member, I always thought it was a little ironic that a lot of people who are Christian know about the Book of Mormon and these gold plates. So supposedly Joseph Smith had these gold plates delivered to him, by an angel, and he was able to magically translate them into the Book of Mormon. And then the angel came and took
and
the
no
gold
one saw
plates
them,
back,
right?
Where no one saw them, right? But I always thought it was ironic that Christians were like, that story seems so ludicrous, but yet they're fine with Moses going up on a mountain and speaking to a burning bush and coming down with God carved stone. I always thought I would see some of those things and be like, well, it's interesting that you're okay believing these set of kind of, what I would think of now as, non-typical miraculous kind of stories, but you're not okay with somebody believing something that just doesn't look quite the same, but is just as non-typical.
Right, yeah,
miraculous.
and I mean, I mentioned earlier I've been studying the composition of the Old Testament recently, and one of the things that you see is doublets and triplets. So you see the same story told several times. Sometimes it's back to back, like Genesis 1 and Genesis 2:3 are two different creation stories, and there's a ton of contradictions between the two if you're willing to see them. But then there's two flood stories, but instead of side to side, they're interwoven. And then when it comes to the tablets, it's like, well, you have two sets of tablets, and there's some thought that maybe these are two stories that were weaved together to make it look like, oh, this is kind of we smashed one and now we have another set. But what was inscribed on the two tablets, according to the sort of the way it's laid out in Exodus and Deuteronomy. Oh, I might be getting that wrong. But it says that that God inscribed the same thing, but then it lists them and they're not the same. So it's like there's a ton of stuff that's really strange. And you're right. It's like, how are the golden plates any weirder than the tablets? It's less. I guess to some people it's less weird because the tablets are like a few thousand years ago and the golden plates are like 180 or I guess close to 200 years ago now.
Right. Yeah, I think that's obviously the more distant in history it gets, I think it becomes a little bit easier to accept because things were different then, right? Like somehow the world operated different back then and operated different back then. And so I think it's easier to make some of those kind of mental leaps of, well, God had to work that way back then, but he didn't need to work that way in, 1820 or whatever time frame,
Well, okay, so Neesha, Kyle's wondering about all these things. And it sounded like he was wondering about these things a little earlier than you were. What was that like for you? Like, did that freak you out? Was it?
Yeah, we had lots of conversations about this. So remember, you go to the temple, and that's how you get exaltation. Well, as a woman, I cannot get exaltation without a man. So Kyle and I are sealed. Right. I have to be married, and I need to be sealed to a man. When Kyle started to question things, and Kyle is a verbal thinker, so he would be reading things on learning, and then he would talk to me about them, and I would be very caught off guard, and I would be very confused. And at first I was like, okay, well, maybe this is healthy. Like, Kyle's always researched things. And then it started to get, like, very doctrinal and very church. And he's had lots of disagreements with church history and things that we had always been taught. The narrative we were always told was now being in question. And I was very scared because he was putting my future, our family's future, our foundation at risk. And so it was a very stressful couple of months. Lots of fighting. Mm-hmm. I mean, we came to a point where we physically just asked, like, do I choose Kyle or do I choose the church? Because I had not researched anything. This kind of came out of nowhere for me. And so it was very, like, scary and traumatic because we just then had to realize, like, do I love and trust you enough? Like, do I actually love you enough to stay with you? Or do I, like, believe in my faith so much that I need to follow it and like separate our family.
And that's, what Neesha said initially is a really big factor, that in Mormonism, salvation, exaltation is not this individual endeavor. It is this kind of family endeavor. We get to the highest level of heaven together, and can't do it individually.
Can we clarify what you mean by exaltation? Because I think I have some idea, but for those watching and listening, it might be good to clarify what that means exactly.
Sure.
Yes. Well, just real quick, there's two different terms that are used within Mormonism. So there is salvation, which is kind of like the basic form. It's that you don't go to hell. So salvation is essentially
you're saved.
You're saved. You're not going to hell. But in Mormonism, they believe in three different tiers of heaven. So there's kind of like the lower tier, the middle tier, and then the highest tier. And the highest tier is where you dwell with God and Jesus, and it's exaltation. And so when we're talking about salvation, you don't have to be married to, kind of be saved from hell. But if you want the highest glory, if you want to be with God and progressing to become kind of like God and one with God, then you need exaltation. And so in Mormonism, you're taught from the very beginning that is your goal, that exaltation is your goal, and anything short of exaltation is failure. And so that is the benchmark you're trying to
That is a
live
ton
up.
of pressure.
It's
a lot of pressure, especially when you have so many boxes to check. And just a little bit of history, I think I didn't realize it at the time, but a few years ago, I kind of told myself like I needed more Jesus, because I think that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is Christian, but there's so many conditions that you have to meet to be saved by Jesus. And so really, Jesus is taught, but what's pounded into you from birth is all of the things that you have to do. So it's go to the temple, get baptized, pay your tithing, keep the word of wisdom, all of these things. So when you're listening to, church sermons and things from the prophet, it's about all of the other things. It's not always about Jesus.
Right. It's
about the rules. So anyway, yes, when Kyle started questioning, it was a huge shocker, and it was terrible.
I think that's what's really hard about Mormonism, and I don't know, maybe this is the same, maybe you can speak to this a little bit, is in mainstream Christianity, this idea of salvation or exaltation is a kind of an individual pursuit. So if your partner, if your spouse, if your companion isn't on the same path, it's not putting your salvation.
Yeah, it might be distressing here and now on earth, but it doesn't necessarily play into your eternal sort of destination or
Right.
Yeah.
So for us, it was a big deal because literally Neesha, you have to imagine, she's completely believing in all of this theology. I'm questioning and leaving, and she's literally saying my end goal is
our children's
end
goal, not only mine, but our children's as well. Like, you are risking everything.
You think, obviously, as a believer, you're always focused on what comes after this life, rather than, the kind of the fundamentals of this life. You're always focused, well, I've got to live the right life for whatever comes next. And so it is everything is at risk.
Man. That must have been... So when was this happening? How long ago were you having these conversations?
About exactly a year ago.
Yeah, almost.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's basically right around when I started talking about my own sort of journey of deconstruction publicly. Yeah, so...
and that's hard to talk about it publicly, so good for you.
Well, yeah, I was sort of doing it privately for some time, maybe a year or so. And Jess and I... Jess is my wife. I've been using the word partner recently. I've been trying it on for other reasons. Just it's interesting to think about everything I've always associated with husband and with wife, and partner feels so descriptive of how I feel she is for me, and so I'm still getting used to how it works, but it feels good to say. So, but it was a similar thing with us. I was processing all this stuff, and I was devouring books and getting up at 4 a.m. to read as much as I could to understand. And Jess was just whoa, this is scary. And then it wasn't until maybe 6 months ago that she sort of went on her own journey of, and for hers looked different than mine. I don't know if you had the same experience, but hers was much more to do with a number of things. She wrestled with an eating disorder for a really long time that had a lot to do with shame and how she saw herself and her sort of the things that she was taught surrounding sexuality and how she saw her body and suffering and connecting suffering with spirituality. I don't know if you've experienced anything like that.
Yes.
But her experience was so much more so much more about life experience, and mine was more sort of about like theology. I don't know if maybe
honestly, I think that sounds
I feel like I could relate to your partner 100% because I feel all of those things she's saying. I feel like you are just drilled, and I don't know, maybe this is most women and most men. I feel like you're drilled as a woman that there's not a real place for you unless you are with a man, and your job as a woman is to help that man to be a mother and to cover your body.
Yeah.
So I get like you have shame for your body because you're not supposed to show it, because I'd hate to put thoughts into someone else's head, a man's head.
Yeah, because you're responsible for those thoughts and also responsible for what he does when he has those thoughts. Yeah, so that's the culture that we all came up in, very, very much so. And so where did things begin to change for you, Neesha? Like did you... Was there a moment, or was it a gradual thing where you started to go, maybe Kyle's onto something here? Or
yeah, it was that question. It was like that pivotal moment of like, do I choose you or do I choose this?
And just to be clear, sorry, and then
go ahead.
that was like an explicit question that we actually asked each other.
Mm-hmm.
So because the church was the path to exaltation for both of us, we had these massive fights.
Oh my gosh, so many fights.
I left. I traveled for work a lot, but I've never willingly left my family. And we had a blow up fight one night, and I get emotional about this stuff. I like walked out the door, and we have 3 sons, and I like looked at their faces as I walked out the door to willingly leave for the night, thinking, I don't know what it's going to be like. Am I coming back tomorrow to pack my shit?
No, you're fine.
To pack my
shit, fuck, damn, it's all fine.
Yeah. That's, I'm leaving with that on my mind, right? Am I coming back tomorrow to pack up and leave permanently? Is this going to be enough to like cause us to come together? Like just all of that, and looking at my kids' faces who've never seen their dad walk out on them. And then him, our oldest, coming to Neesha and saying,
oh, that was hard.
What's dad doing? Where's dad going? So there were some like terrible, terrible times. And so when we asked that question of each other, we literally sat down and said, we kind of need to decide this. Are you going to choose? And it wasn't just Neesha. It was, we were asking each other, are you going to choose our relationship, or are you going to choose belief? And so the question for me was, if I have to pretend like I believe this for the rest of my life in order to maintain my relationship with Neesha and our children, am I willing to do that? And for Neesha, it was, if I have to leave the church in order to maintain that, am I willing to do that? So it wasn't one of us forcing it on the other. It was just asking, literally, are we going to choose our marriage and our relationship, or are we going to choose belief?
Wow. Wow, that is...
We both said we would choose each other.
I love that. I can't even imagine that moment. And I know a lot of people who go through these processes have versions of that story. So thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing. I know there's a lot of people that'll feel a little bit less alone because you're willing to share your story, So you guys choose each other. And then what? Like, then did you sort of like wake up the next day and go like, okay, now what do we do? Right?
Well, it's just funny because there's so much to deconstruct in Mormonism. There's so much history to learn because, like Kyle mentioned, you're only taught a very specific narrative. And I'm sure I'm learning this is true for Christianity too, right? You're taught this one narrative. So once you start reading, holy Moses, you're down the rabbit hole. You know this. Like,
oh, yeah.
So Kyle, like I said, is a verbal thinker. And so we would exercise in the morning. This is like pre me deciding I was ready to join him on this journey. And so he would just be, did you know this? Did you know this? And we would just go at it. And eventually I'd be like, stop talking to me. stop reading. Like, just find a friend to talk to. It's not me. Like, don't talk to me. Kyle doesn't have very many friends, so he kept coming.
Shade.
Which is fine. So eventually I was like, well, I kind of already know all of this stuff, but I feel like I need to read to see if maybe like I can still maintain my faith and be like the one believer. But if I research enough, I'll be able to defend my faith to Kyle, and I'll bring him back. So that was the goal, right? It was to find the truth.
I mean, I didn't know that was the goal at the time, but obviously she
that was the goal, was to defend my faith to him. And then just like Kyle, as you start reading, you're like, whoa, that doesn't make sense. Why is that in there? That happened. Talking about Joseph Smith, talking about polygamy, I was taught Joseph was not a polygamist. So when I read that by church approved material, I was shocked. I was just absolutely like, I just was like, whoa, either everybody else in the world doesn't know or people are lying to me. That was really hard for me to learn. And then there was more. Every time I read it was something else. I was like, wait a minute, am I just stupid? Like, nobody taught me this growing up. That was not taught to me. And then I would just keep finding these things out. And so in Mormonism, there's a lot of people who have put out really incredible work. One thing is called the Ces Letter. And there's this man who wrote a church educational director a letter, and he proposed all these problematic questions about church history and the historicity of the Book of Mormon and things like that. And there's kind of like a dumbed down version or a softer toned version called A Letter for My Wife. And I gave myself permission to read that because I really needed to know where he was getting his information and if I could believe it and how I felt after it. Because in Mormonism, that's considered like anti-Mormon literature. And at that point, I was only reading church-approved things, right? But even the church-approved things were kind of blowing my mind, which is weird that these things were always out there, but I never knew them, and I would have never searched for them on my own. I was totally complacent, being like, the prophet said to start, like, dyeing your hair pink. Okay, I'll do it. Like, or whatever the prophet said, I was going to do. And so to give myself permission to read A Letter for My Wife was huge for me. And then it just pointed out so many more problematic things. And it took me a couple days to process. So it wasn't like I woke up the next morning and I was like, okay, we're going to do this. And it was a couple of months. And then I was grateful that Kyle had already gone through it. So when I would read something, he would be very compassionate. Because he's like, I know that. Really sad that I was not there for him during those processes. Like, because when he was going through it, I was like, knock it off. Stop reading, grow some balls, and go to church. Like, it was very different. So I feel really regretful that I wasn't able to show him the love and compassion he's been able to show me through the process, because he just knows what it's like, and it's a lonely process. And I don't know about for you and your process, but you do speak privately about it because you're really afraid of how everyone else is gonna react.
For me, it was a lot of like I would have a question. I'd be like, this seems odd. And then I would sort of discreetly talk to a close friend about it. And very often, if they were about the same age as me, and if they were raised in the church like I was, very often they'd be like, yeah, I've kind of wondered about that too. But like, I noticed that we're all whispering, you know? And I was like, no one is saying this stuff out loud. Someone is going to at some point, and when that starts happening, the floodgates are going to open. That's what I saw in my head, and I honestly, and maybe you guys will agree with this, I think COVID changed things for a lot of people, because for me, I mean, I remember it was like 2 months into COVID lockdown where life already felt kind of destroyed, you know, and we were locked in a house with 2 toddlers. which you guys know something about. And so I was just like, I remember having a conversation with Jess, and I was like, I can't not talk about this stuff publicly anymore. And she was just like, go for it, honey. And I was like, really?
Good for her.
So I'm curious. I don't want to turn into the interviewer, but I mean, you had a lot. You had your career kind of riding on this, or were you already?
Yes and no. So I was in a Christian band for 15 years, but I had already begun to initiate sort of winding that down, because I had been doing it for so long. I had started to get the sense that we were just doing the same things over and over, and I didn't want to tour full time while raising kids. Jess and I waited 10 years to have kids, partially because we both work so much and I was traveling so much. So we were already sort of winding the band down. And I noticed that as it was a gradual process, and we didn't make an announcement that we're like, oh, we're done or anything like that. But we sort of were quietly winding the band down. And I noticed as my involvement in Christian music decreased, my willingness to ask questions increased.
Wow.
I realized that I had a lot of doubts that I hadn't even allowed myself to consider. And so that's kind of what it was for me. And then with COVID, it was like, I think it just put so many people, and myself included, in this place where it was just like, well, might as well be honest about what I am feeling, because like the whole world is destroyed anyways. It felt like that. I know that sounds dramatic, but we were walking through a grocery store when we were having this conversation about whether I would say something publicly. And this was like early on, well, somewhat early on. This is like 2 months into the pandemic. And it was like, there's tape on the floor telling you which aisles you can go through, and everyone's wearing masks, and we're not used to that yet, and it was just felt very apocalyptic. And I think that influenced my decision and Jess's willingness for me to start talking about this stuff publicly. And once I did, it was just like I discovered so many other people thinking, feeling, and speaking about the same things as me. So.
Yes, yeah. I think that is true. I think that is 100% true. We didn't know there was this whole little post-Mormon community until we were post-Mormon, or even in our local area, like you said, like kind of whispering about it to other people, kind of like giving feelers of how people would respond. And then when you're like, oh, this is a safe person, then they'll give you a list of names of other people, and you're like, whoa, I do have a community here, and I can talk about this and process this with other people, which is really, really helpful.
That's awesome. So,
we've gotten a lot of messages. I mean, hundreds of messages on TikTok from people from all sorts of religious backgrounds. I mean, all over the place, like Mennonite and Jehovah's Witness. We even had somebody from Amway who was like, your story is literally like what I experienced within Amway.
Yeah, Amway's a religion.
And we... and evangelicals and fundamentalists and just all over, just saying, I know that you came from this space, but it sounds so much like my experience. And you just do. You see that there's so many people going through this. And Gallup just released their poll from 2020 showing that for the first time that they've been doing religiousness or religiosity in the U.S., there are more non-religious people in the U.S. than religious people for the first time they've been doing it.
I haven't seen that poll. I need to go look at that.
Yeah, first time. So I do think it's this bigger trend. I also, as you were kind of talking about how you noticed that the less you were doing Christian music, the more open you were, I think that's one big thing that helped us is it's very hard to ask these questions when you're, and it may not be a direct parallel to your experience, but when you're kind of constantly being, when your previous beliefs are constantly being reinforced.
Right.
So when you're going to church every Sunday, when you're, having these Sunday school lessons, or you're having listening to these sermons.
Well, to interject for 1 second too, not only that, but as Mormons, you serve in the church for free, right? And so they call you to specific callings. So not only are you doing your Sunday things, but throughout the week, you're also ministering, because you're assigned ministering people to go see, and then you're also assigned your calling. So I was in the primary, and I was over the little kids, and Kyle was in the Sunday school, and he was over the adults. So not only are you doing Sunday services, but you're also trying to maintain your calling and help all those people, and then minister to the people you're assigned to minister, and then indoctrinate your children. So you are engulfed in these things. So when COVID hit, it gave you a separation from some of those things.
Yeah, it's hard to ask those really hard it's fine. It's tough to find the space to ask those difficult questions when when your previous beliefs are constantly being reinforced. And once COVID gave us space, due to quarantine, to not be doing all of those activities and not have that constant reinforcement, it definitely opened up room to really ask.
And time, honestly, because I was talking to a friend one time and she's like, honestly, having a faith crisis and transition is kind of a privilege because you have so much time, if you have the time. So COVID was a privilege to be able to give you the time to actually delve into these
I relate
things.
to that.
Because when you worked a 9-to-5 job and you are serving in your church or you're touring all the time and then you have a family to take care of, when do you have time to go read 20 books in a month? Yeah,
my time came from when we had our son, our older child. He once we got him to one feeding a night, I started doing the night feedings. And so there would be a night feeding around 4:30 or 5, and I just started staying up after that time. And I discovered, I'm like, wow, this time from like 4:30 to 7:30 is really peaceful and lovely. And so that I was reading probably 3 or 4 hours a day, partially because of that. Now, of course, that I paid for it in the evening. And now, like, to this day, like I typically get up at 4, but I'll go to, we put our kids down at 8, and then I'm just like, I'm gone. I'm out. Like by 9 o'clock, I'm like, bye-bye.
Yep. You're speaking my language.
You are.
So,
for sure.
So you're going through this process. You've chosen each other. Neesha, you're starting to see some of these same things. This is during quarantine now at this point, right?
So at this point, we're nearing. I didn't start actually reading a thing until probably September, October
Of just
last year. So very similar to your wife.
Our
Jess.
stories are so similar, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, very similar. And so then we, kind of had to talk to our kids. Kind of already had been hearing things.
They heard us fight.
They heard us fight
and argue.
They saw that our Sundays, because even though we weren't going to church because of COVID, we still held church and sacrament in our house on Sundays. In the Mormon church, you had to get permission to do sacrament on Sunday. And so we got permission to do that. And so Kyle was still blessing and passing the sacrament. But then there were Sundays where I was like, are you really worthy to be doing that?
Worthiness is a big thing in Mormonism. You can't be doing those things if you're not worthy, right? If you're not. And I had, I'd started to
drink coffee.
Yeah, I'd started to drink coffee at that point, and I was still blessing, bread and water to be symbolic of.
You should no, that's a no.
It is in Mormonism. It's no. So there were these conversations that were taking place, and the kids were seeing them. And then once Neesha read a letter from my wife, I think what was interesting, maybe you can speak to this, is her process was so accelerated.
Yeah.
Because I don't know, I had gone through this, you'd already been kind of listening to it and hearing it, and so once you gave yourself permission to read, it felt like at that point the whole process was just the very accelerated quick.
Yeah, well, I love you, but Kyle could spend hours a day reading, and I couldn't keep up with him. I was homeschooling our kids and taking care of things, right? We've got 3 kids who are all in school, and I also care for an elderly lady who lives with us. So I was I was working, I was doing stuff, so I couldn't keep up with him. And so when it was my time, he was kind of done with his faith crisis a little bit. So he's all right, where are you at? We're done. We're done being Mormon. But part of me was well, maybe we can be 1 foot in, 1 foot out.
Can we be progressive Mormons?
Right.
Yes.
Can't we be Mormons 2.0? Can't we do that? We have kids, and one was almost about to be
I was about
8.
to ask how old your kids are.
Right, yeah.
Yes, so we have our oldest is 9, our middle is 8, and
so
our youngest
definitely
is 6.
old enough to know that these are things that are changing.
Oh,
for sure.
For sure. And our middle child in the Mormon church, you get baptized at 8 years old. So we knew that come March, he would be old enough to be baptized. And that was our oldest was baptized, and our middle was about to have the opportunity. Now, at this point, Kyle would not have been worthy to baptize him, nor did he want to, really.
Well, in Mormonism, I would have been the one to baptize him because all like worthy adult males have, authority or priesthood to do that. So I baptized our oldest. I would have baptized our middle, but it had become this question of, can we keep this secret long enough for me to baptize him, even though, because I didn't believe anymore. So I was like, I don't care if they like what I'm doing or not, but I'll keep it a secret just to help him feel okay. He's got cousins that are the same age, and so
they're gonna be baptized this year. So we didn't want him to feel left out, but we were also, that was also our community.
Yeah,
that was all of our friends. So we're like, once we tell people, like,
it's a costly decision. Yeah, and that's a theme that I hear over and over and over from so many different people, that it's not, it's very often family and friends and sometimes career, and so you get all that together, and there's a tremendous incentive to avoid the questions. Yeah,
absolutely.
For sure.
That was huge. We talked a lot about that. Our kids' friends are all members of the church.
Right.
All of our friends, it's a very insular community because you're like, I want to be around these people who believe the same and who share all the same values, and you get awkward in socializing with people that don't see the world in that way.
Well, who are breaking commandments.
Right.
Like, why would you be drinking coffee? That's not allowed. Like, you can't. So I don't like kids exposed to that. I don't want that to be a normal thing, because if they see it, what if they want to drink it? Then we have a huge issue to deal with.
Right. Our kids were old enough to have been indoctrinated and to have bought into some of this kind of cultural stuff. And
so by indoctrinated, we told them we don't drink it because God told us not to, and we follow the prophet and we obey God.
Right.
And so now what do you tell them?
Yeah, well, so when I introduced alcohol, we didn't even know this because it'd never been a conversation we'd had, right, with our kids about what they thought of alcohol. So when I introduced alcohol, our oldest kid was in tears because his only association with alcohol was that it was wicked, forbidden by God, and a movie that he'd seen where the father in the movie was an alcoholic and became abusive. So those are the only associations he even had with alcohol. So when I introduced it, he was in tears because he thought that that's who I was going to become. He thought if Dad has one drink of alcohol, he's going to become violent and abusive, and like that's it was his only way of seeing it. And so he's in tears, and we're like, what's going on? Why are you? And so we had to have these conversations where we had to try to slowly introduce these things and say, yeah, we know that we taught you all of this stuff. We know that's so hard as a parent.
We were really good Mormons. We were really good at teaching our kids and making sure that they were going to be good Mormons too.
It's just so hard to go to your kid and explain, I got all this wrong. I'm sorry that I spent the first 9 years of your life teaching you all of this stuff. I don't want to offend people.
We will
who
pay
may
for
still
your
be
therapy
believers.
in 10
Well,
years.
I mean, I have had similar thoughts. Our kids are younger, so my son's birthday is 2 days from now, and he turns he turns 4, and my daughter's my daughter will be 3 in September. So they're younger. So we luckily we sort of went through this process before we had taught them a lot about this stuff. I mean, I did have my son circumcised when he was born, and I actually regret that now. But that's just a personal thing. I mean, there's lots of circumcision isn't strictly always a religious thing. So I just know that was the motivator for me. And because of that, I have complex feelings about it now. But as far as what they're used to, we haven't had to go through some of the stuff like you just described. But I know there's things that we are teaching them that we'll feel differently about in the future. I know that they're going to pick up some baggage from us that we're just not aware we're giving to them, and that's just the nature of the beast. And so we actually joke, Jess and I joke frequently about maybe instead of saving for college, we should save for like a therapy fund.
Yes.
Because both Jess and I have
Yes.
benefited tremendously from therapy. And
Yes. Well, we've talked about that, just putting our oldest in now almost and just normalize it for right now when he's this little 9-year-old. To be like, let's just start talking about this because, like you said, there is baggage that maybe we're really unaware of. And
Right.
to go back to something like I don't wear garments anymore. So I started, wearing tank tops and shorter shorts, which is very new to our kids. And so just the other day I was wearing a dress that had spaghetti straps and all of the kids were like, what are you wearing? Like, I can see your shoulders and I'm not sure I like that. And who are you, Mom? And so it's just things like that where I'm like, okay, how are they internalizing this? Like, talk to them about this. How can I make sure that they still feel safe and comfortable? And
well, that must be a really interesting thing to approach too, because, I mean, when you're teaching kids, when you're teaching kids about sexuality, it's like that's not just conversations about sex. It's about body image. 100%. It's about being comfortable in your body. It's about the way you dress and the way you carry yourself. I mean, I know for Jess, like when she went through this sort of healing process to do with her eating disorder and with the way that she saw her own body, it revolutionized who she is. Like I joked around about I was like, babe, you're coming into your power. Cause it changed the way we related to each other. Like one time we were having a disagreement about something and she said, hey, I'm just going to take this opportunity to speak up for myself right now. When you, and not that she didn't before, but the language she was using had changed. And she said, when you said this, this is kind of what happened on my end. This is how it felt to me when you said that. And I just want you to know, I'm not mad at you, but that's not okay. And you just need to know that. And I was like,
yes, good for her.
Yes, ma'am. Okay. Because before I think she was a lot more timid in the way that she would address those situations. And she was less sure of herself. Like if she felt like, hey, I don't think it's okay that John just said that. In the past, she would have either swallowed that and dealt with it, or she would have held on to it quietly until she sort of like lashed out a little bit. Yeah. And this time she was like, hey, I'm recognizing that it's okay for me to believe my gut instinct that John shouldn't talk to me like that. And without it being a big deal, I can just tell him that's not okay. And that's what she did. And I was like, this is fantastic. Like I just feel like she's carrying herself with so much more confidence. She's trusting her own instincts and intuition. She's trusting her own desire. I mean, when it comes to sexuality and outside of sexuality, it's this really comprehensive thing. And so you're walking through this stuff with your kids, and even like, oh, Mom, I can see your shoulders and spaghetti straps. Like that's a complex conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. And honestly, everything you said is what I've been watching with Neesha, the same exact thing. Just this freedom of I can be whoever I feel like I need to and want to be, and I don't have to put any sort of arbitrary guidelines or boundaries. And it's one thing to go through that self-exploration and find, guidelines and boundaries. It's another to have those put on you from the time that you're a kid, right? And so just to see Neesha be in this space like that, wearing the spaghetti strap sundress, or I don't even know if that's what it is, but that was a big deal. It wasn't just for the kids. Like that was a strategic and intentional decision. And it was a symbol of like Neesha's own freedom and breaking out. It wasn't just, oh, I'm going to wear a dress today. It was an actual intentional decision that said, this is a way for me to express myself. This is a way for me to be free, to be a little bit vulnerable, to be courageous. And it was all of those things. And so, it's almost every day that I'm seeing those moments from Neesha where she's just being herself. She's speaking up, just like you said, she's being bold in conversations. She's saying, you know what? I'm actually going to have this conversation with my friend. I'm going to say what I think about this. I'm going to call, my mom, and I'm going to have this conversation, not in a rude way, but I'm going to speak up and I'm going to speak out. And yeah, everything you said is exactly what I see coming from Neesha every day. And I said this on another show. I feel privileged that I get to watch that experience in somebody else's life, to just come out of this shell.
Thank you.
I love that. I relate to our stories are so similar. And with Jess too, like, I'm just seeing her, like, she loves doing, we've already talked about, she loves doing high fitness. And for those people that don't know what high fitness is, it's a group fitness thing that involves a lot of movement. It's sort of like choreographed dancing. But it's very like, I don't think I could get through an hour of it. But I run, that's my thing. But I'm just seeing, like, she took up roller skating. And so, like, half of her, like, Instagram posts are her, like, learning new roller skating moves. And she got asked to be a part of, like, a roller skating photo shoot recently. And I just watched her, like, she always used to be shy on camera. Oh, don't take pictures of me, that kind of thing. And I've seen her, like, and then I was there for the photo shoot, and I was, like, watching her, like, be so comfortable and so free. And it took me back to thinking about the sort of complementarianism that gets taught in a lot of Christian circles, including Mormonism, that men lead and women follow, and men should be strong and women should be meek, and submissive and quiet
and virtuous
and it
pure.
Just makes me think about all that we're missing out on from amazing women who have something to say, and I have, and in this last year, I mean, I've been profoundly influenced by a number of women that, if they had held to this complementarian idea, they wouldn't have written the books that they wrote. They wouldn't have been speaking the things that they speak. So yeah, I'm cheering you on, Neesha. Like, and I know Jess is too. And
thank you. Yeah, I'm cheering her on. I want to meet her, and I want her, and I just want to be like, you go, girl.
Well, let's do a Zoom date or something sometime.
Absolutely. Just in terms of that change, it's not just, and I'm not, I hope this comes across in the way that I intend it. It's a learning process for me as a man as well, because I've always had that privilege, even within our home and our marriage, of, especially within Mormonism, of I am the patriarch, and at the end of the day, I have the final say. And it's not like I walked around like I got the final say, but there were moments where that was just there. And it's different to reach a point where based on where I'm at and how I see the world, I no longer have any of that. Like, I've even told Neesha, and maybe this is extreme, and hopefully some people can, like, grab in onto this. I told Neesha, where I'm at in the world, I couldn't ever, so we've only ever been together. We were both virgins when we got married. We've only ever been together. If she were like, I missed out on something in life, like Neesha was 19 when we got married. If she came to me and she was like, I missed out on something in life, I'm not at a point where, the way I see the world, I would have any, like, way of saying, I don't think you should do that, because it's not that I wouldn't want her to, right? It's not that I wouldn't want to say, well, no, don't go do that. But I just don't even have that position anymore to say, no, you shouldn't get to experience that. And so it's learning for me to be the, like, submissive, to bring out that submissive part of me and saying, this is your life to live. And I hope I can be here to, like, partner with you and support you in doing that. But I can't project onto you anymore arbitrary expectations. We can come to some together, right? But I can't project onto you. You have to live up to this, like, set of standards that I created. And so it is, we are learning how to navigate that as Forward.
And I don't want to shift the whole conversation, but I think just the expectations. When we decided to finally leave Mormonism, our expectations of each other dropped significantly, which sounds kind of terrible, but I could finally love Kyle for Kyle. Because before I had all these expectations of him being the priesthood holder and the patriarch of our home, being like, you should be, like, if he wasn't calling everyone for family prayer and I had to do it, in my head I'd be like, well, he's lazy and he's slacking right now, and why do I have to do it? I just did all these things that a woman was supposed to do all day. Like, I cooked and I cleaned and I taught our kids, and then his one job is to, like, gather everyone for prayer, and he's not doing that, so I don't like him right now. Or if it was whatever, like scripture study or whatever I felt like he needed to do as the patriarch of our home, I just was judging him every day because I was like, he can do this. I didn't see him read his scriptures today, so he probably didn't do it. So I'm more worthy than he is. And there was always like this kind of like competition and judgment in our relationship. And once we let go of this Mormonism culture, I was like, I can love you and appreciate you. And if occasionally you want to gather the family around for meditation, like, you're the best ever.
That's so awesome. I relate to all of that too, because like the way that looked for us is we started revisiting. I mean, we've been married for 14 years, and yeah, I mean, Jess was 20 when we got married. I was 23, so like we have very similar stories in that regard. And but we, revisiting, like, hey, we defaulted to you stay home with the kids and I work. Do we need to take another look at that? And we're kind of in the middle of just re-looking at our life and going like, do we want our life to look different? And maybe that involves me working less and being with the kids more. And maybe like Jess does hair and makeup, and one of the things we've tinkered around with is her starting a spray tanning business because she loves. She has all this. She's been doing spray tanning as a part of her hair and makeup thing, but to just build that out and going like, and we've been talking about that, and I've been like, how cool would it be for me to scale back and like just support her and like go do that, and it just caused us to reformulate a lot of assumptions that we had. Like you said, like it doesn't, we don't want to default. I guess we've been realizing all the ways that we've just defaulted to certain ways of seeing things with me being the leader. And realizing that we don't have to do it that way. Now, for some people, some of those dynamics really work for those people. So I don't ever want people to be confused and say that like, oh, it's always bad if a man is sort of more of a leader than a woman. It's not always bad, but I think looking at it as the default and the way it has to be, I think that can be pretty harmful.
Right. I think what it's allowed us to do, and I completely agree with everything you just said, what it's allowed us to do is really ask that question, which of these dynamics are actually working versus which of these dynamics have we been forcing even though they're not actually working for us. And that's the freedom to say, okay, even if it's, one of you staying home versus the other one, or even simple responsibilities, who's going to cook? In our house, it was always Neesha is the woman. She has all of the homemaker responsibilities, and just the freedom to say, is this actually working? Is this dynamic actually working? And be open and honest with each other and say, no, actually, I don't like this role that I've been delegated. And there's something else I can be doing of equal value if you want to take this piece on. And just that.
I need you to pick up a spatula, Kyle.
Amen.
we have the problem of. Sorry, what's that?
I said if Kyle cooks, it means we're going to Chick-fil-A.
Yeah, neither of us cook, so that's sort of been a problem for us. We've never really cracked that one. But so what do you feel like the future looks like for you guys? Like, it sounds like you found some amount of community, because that can be a big problem for people that leave religious spaces. It sounds like you found some of that, but are you still sort of in the process of seeing what that looks like for you guys, or?
Yeah, there were two dynamics that we still ask ourselves. There are two kind of like overarching things that we ask ourselves a lot. And the first one is, where are we going to find community? And And the second one is, what are the tools that we're going to give our kids? In religion, we had this like explicit set of tools, and it was, these are the tools you give your kids to live a good, healthy life. And now none of those tools work for us. I shouldn't say none, but a lot of those tools don't work for us anymore. And so those are the two questions we ask a lot, which, again, community and tools we're going to give our kids. And I don't know, community, what have we been doing for community?
Yeah, Kyle and I joined a CrossFit gym. And so that's where we're trying to form some community. And
which, just a second, one of the first comments on one of our TikToks was like Mormonism, Scientology, CrossFit, all cults.
All cults. and joined another.
And we just joined CrossFit. So
That's awesome.
We love cults. It's in our blood.
Yeah, everyone. I mean, to a degree, everyone loves a cult.
Yeah.
You know, it's because it's like if it's like, what do you think football teams are?
Yeah.
You know, like the fandom of like,
Yeah.
you know, if you're a you know, Kansas City Chiefs fan,
Yay,
like,
Kansas City Chiefs.
right? Which I mean I am over here in San Diego cheering for Mahomes.
Oh, good. Yeah.
But you know, like there's the word cult gets thrown around a lot, but it's like, in my mind, a lot of times a cult is just a group of people who believe something you don't.
Sure.
yeah, zealous, right? Like at some level of, yeah. But yeah.
Yeah. So
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So CrossFit is sort of part of the community element for you guys.
Right. And then our kids are we just decided we've got to put our kids in more things because all of their friends are Mormon. And when we were Mormon, they hold activity nights for children where they would be able to see their friends and they would see them again on Sunday. And so now that we're not doing the activity night on Wednesday, we were like, we got to find something else. So we put the kids in karate. And our karate instructor is just really sweet. And the other day, he sent us a text and wished our middle child a happy birthday. And he just said, I am so grateful your family is now a part of our family, our karate family. And he like doesn't know that is so important, and that's what we were trying to find. And I could never tell him because I would just cry all over him. It was such a sweet message, and just helped me realize like the universe is watching out for us and trying to help us and give us some good karma.
Yeah.
So that's
good.
I mean, from a community standpoint, we've been able to maintain some of our friendships. They've definitely gotten awkward, and they're not the same as they were because we just don't connect in the same way. And then the other big one was, what do we do for our kids? And I won't go into. I don't want this to ever feel like I'm trying to pitch anything. But when we first had this question of what are the tools we're going to give our kids, my PhD is educational psychology, specifically focused on development and learning. And so I just I dove into every piece of research I could find to figure out like, okay, if it's not religion and I'm not giving them these tools, what can we be giving them? And so I went and I created these journals that we do with our kids. So we have these journals that we call them co-journals or challenge journals. And it's literally a journal where I included a bunch of different activities that we do with our kids, and then we journal back and forth. There's lessons in them. And so in terms of the tools piece, like that's what we turn to are these co-journals that we do with our kids.
Wow, that's so cool. Is that something you're planning on like putting out publicly, or is that something just like a private thing? Yeah.
It started as a private thing, and we mentioned it a few times on our TikTok account, and people were like, I want to know about this. Tell us more about co-journaling. Tell us more about the challenges. So it is something that we're working to release publicly, and it should be honestly available pretty soon here in the next couple of weeks.
That's awesome. Yeah, because I think that's a big question for a lot of people is like, what do we, you know, because a lot of religious spaces offer like built-in ways of raising kids and programs and stuff like that. And so when you detach yourself from that, sometimes there's a bit of a void there. And yeah, the fact that you're looking at addressing that void is amazing.
Well, and we just didn't want, we saw a lot of people who had left, and this is not a criticism of them. It's just something we didn't want for ourselves. We saw a lot of people who left who seemed like all of the time that they were devoting just became unintentional time. When I was religious, I had all of this intentional time that I was giving. Now I'm not religious, and I can't actually tell you what's happening with like this extra time that I've gotten back. And we kind of looked at it and we're like, we're already spending all this money on tithing. We're already spending all this time on church. There's enough of both of those that we can, make half of it unintentional and still keep half of it intentional. And so we looked for what are some, small things we can supplement that are non-religious in nature, but are to be useful life experiences and tools and habits and routines for our family. And so
I was gonna say, plus, like you said, like we had been doing things a lot with our kids. Sundays was church, and Mondays was family home evening, and Wednesdays were activities, and and every night was family prayer and scripture study. And we didn't want to just pull all of these normal things from our kids and be like, we are just disrupting everything.
Right.
Like we needed to keep some things. Some type of schedule with our kids and something that they could predict was going to happen. So we're just, instead of prayer, maybe it's meditation and journaling.
Sometimes it's just discussion. Like the nature and content of some of those have changed, but we've tried to keep like patterns and routines so that it didn't feel quite as disruptive. We felt like it would, literally be pulling the rug out from under them to be like, hey, we're 100% Mormon and we're giving 20 hours a week, and all of a sudden we don't care about anything. Like,
go play the Switch.
Yeah.
Teach you things.
Well, and that can sometimes be a trope too, that people who deconvert out of a religious space are just like, they're just wanting the freedom to do whatever the hell they want to do. And that's, in my experience, that's almost never the case. Like it's typically like a real process of looking at the belief and how those beliefs are sort of playing out in the world and going like, hey, is this like, do I really believe this? And do I agree? Do I believe it in light of all the implications that I see?
It's unfortunate because it is a benefit of deconstruction, but a lot of people perceive it as the reason for deconstruction when it's like, no, this is just a benefit. This is just one of the good things, right?
Yeah,
like,
you get a lot of time back.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. But people, to your point, are like, well, that's the reason. You just wanted, this freedom, or you wanted to sin, or you wanted to, not have this moral compass that we have. Like, but it's like, no, those are just benefits of deconstructing.
Which is so hard because, if people knew the time you put in to deconstructing your faith crisis, because in Mormonism, you deconstruct Mormonism, and then you're left with the Bible, and you're like, wait a minute, I'm already deconstructing.
Let's keep this going.
Right?
Yeah.
And so it's like this twofold problem, and there's so much time spent.
Yeah.
It was that.
Yeah, that's I see that a lot. People that sort of go through this process of deconstruction, like I have never seen it undertaken lightly. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I have talked to hundreds, if not thousands, of people that have gone through this process over the last year. And it could be that I'm just the people that are taking it lightly and casually don't talk to me. That could be. But I haven't seen that to be a very could thing. So, yeah. Well,
and I really appreciate that. I'm sorry, you can end it.
No, go ahead. No, you say.
Yesterday, this whole weekend, and I don't know about for you, if it's Easter, so it was kind of a big deal. And just, in our new lifestyle, but it was also 2 weekends out of the year. It's general conference where the prophet and the 12 apostles of the church speak, and
for 10 hours. And that was something that the prophet mentioned to people, and we knew our loved ones were going to be watching this, but he mentioned that people who leave are lazy, and it hit me so hard because I thought, this is the prophet of this church, and he's telling my family that I'm lazy. And I was like, thank you for saying that, John, because we were not lazy.
Yeah.
And I just, people need.
It's stuff like that it gets trotted out to help. I want to be careful with my words here, but it gets trotted out often to shame people who have questions and scare people who have doubts. And to maintain the boundaries of the faith, and to gather people in and make them feel really negatively towards people that question. And I mean, we're seeing the same thing. Like in some of the spaces I move in now, like the term deconstruction has become a common term, and for various reasons. I mean, and you study, psychology and development, so you're probably familiar with the term deconstruction technically, which is sort of different than how we use it now.
Right.
Right. But we're starting to see like organizations like the Gospel Coalition sort of co-opt the term deconstruction and tell their followers like, this is the right way to deconstruct and this is the wrong way. It's only right if you end up back at the feet of Jesus.
Right.
And we're just like, it's like if you deconstruct a taco and put it back exactly the way that it was, it's not a deconstructed taco. It's a taco.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I'm with you guys. Like this process, you guys clearly have taken it seriously. Obviously, it was a hugely challenging process for both of you, but ultimately freeing, it seems like, and that's been my experience and Jess's experience as well. So
we love that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing.
For speaking out.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing your story. It was so cool for me over the last 90 minutes to hear so many similarities between our journey and yours. And I think a lot of people that watch this and listen to this are gonna feel the same. I'm realizing now that you're actually the first couple that I've interviewed together.
Oh, nice.
And I think some of the stuff you talked about, with your journey as a couple, I think that's going to feel really, really familiar to a lot of people out there.
Yeah.
I hope that's the thing. The only reason we started the TikTok account was just to help people feel not alone in this, because like we talked earlier, so many people are whispering about it, and it can make you feel really alone. It can make you feel like you're doing something wrong. It can make you feel like you're crazy and having these thoughts, like why, nobody else is thinking this stuff. And I mean, that's all that we hope, is that somebody who's in this space hears our story and says, you know what, I'm not alone in this, and I'm not crazy for having some of these thoughts and concerns, and I'm not broken because this is hard and it's painful. Right. And we just want people to be seen and heard and feel validated by seeing that, yeah, we've been there and it sucks so bad, but there is light, there is hope. There's a whole way to live outside of dogma and strict theology and orthodoxy and all those things that sometimes really can be really toxic and harmful for people.
Yeah. I mean, honestly, the beauty of this all is our marriage is so much better than it has ever been.
Yeah.
And so
same
great deconstruction.
Same. Yeah. Well, so where can people find you? I mean, I know obviously on TikTok, and I'll have a link in the show notes and the YouTube description. But where else can people find you if they want to connect with you guys?
Yeah, so our TikTok is challenge.faith. We have a website, which is challengejournals.com. And we'll have our blog up and some other free resources and things there. And then Neesha's not super active on Facebook, but I do have quite a few people that follow me on Facebook. So you're happy to it's just Kyle Brost on Facebook. And I'm happy to connect with people. And if you follow me, you won't be alone. You won't be like the lone person who follows Kyle Brost. Other people that follow me there as well. So you're happy to, I'm happy to have people follow me. I'm even happy to add friends. And so either Kyle Brost on Facebook, challengejournals.com, or challenge.faith at TikTok.
Perfect. Cool. Thank you guys so much.
Yes,
thank you so much.
This is great.
Okay, that was my conversation with Kyle and Neesha Brost. Thank you guys so much for watching and listening. Like I said in the intro, there are a ton of amazing conversations coming up. So I hope you'll stick in there with me. Hang in there with me? stick around with me. I love combining these phrases to awful effect, apparently. I hope you'll hang in there with me. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave a comment if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on the podcast, drop me a tweet at John Steingard or hit me up on Instagram at John Steingard. And until next week, I'll see you next week. Stay curious, guys.